What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. Got a really quick deck profile for you today on Pauper Tron. So this is a slight variation on the build I posted previously. I think with the metagame shifts recently, the deck is pretty well positioned right now. Just want to talk about the few changes I've made to the deck since I last posted it. So starting with the mana base, of course we have the 12 Tron lands, 4 Urza's Tower, 4 Urza's Mine, 4 Urza's Power Plant, no doubt about those. 1 Bojuka Bog, 1 Quandrix Campus, 2 Island, and then the Gates package we have 4 Sea Gate, 2 Heap Gate. So at first I'm just going to be talking about all the cards from the main deck that were the same as before. So the mana base is identical, no problems with that. Onto the spells. We have the Flicker package, 1 Pulse of Murasa, 1 Ghostly Flicker, 1 Ephemerate, counter spells, 1 Memory Lapse, 1 Prohibit, the defense, we have 2 Moments Peace, 1 Weather the Storm, 1 Tangle. And creatures, 4 Mulldrifter, 1 Dinrova Horror, 3 Mnemonic Wall, the artifacts, 3 Simic Signet, 4 Expedition Map, 4 Navigation Orb, and then the draw / tutoring / filtering, 4 Impulse, 1 Crop Rotation, and 2 Mystical Teachings. So the last 3 cards in the previous version of this list that I posted were 1 Compulsive Research as like a 5th Mulldrifter card advantage option / win condition with targeting your opponent with the draw 3 to make them deck out. I had 1 Explore as like a ramp option to go with the extra lands in hand from the Navigation Orb and all the card draw that sometimes causes you to flood on lands. And the last card was 1 Exclude as like a 3rd counterspell that's both interaction but also a card advantage tool as well. So the first card to be cut from those 3 were the Explore. I've like taken this card in and out in the past as like I test it a few games and then it does something exciting and then I play more with it and I realize that it's just not very good enough. Like the floor on it is just too low. When it's bad, it's really bad, and when it's good, it's usually in situations where you're already winning anyway. So happy to cut the Explore. The Exclude, as like a card advantage option, it was a bit too narrow to use. Like in a spot where you wanted to Mystical Teachings for a thing that let you dig further, having your only options be either Exclude or Impulse were not exciting. Because like Impulse was too easy for it to miss on what you wanted to find, and Exclude was even worse than that, and it was very situational for when you could use it. The other problem with Exclude The main problem with Exclude is that the metagame shifted away from the decks that it's good against. They banned all the, well, not all, but most of the initiative cards, which are like the slow, high impact creatures that you really are vulnerable to Exclude. The Monarch cards are not that popular right now. Mulldrifter as a card is not very popular right now. So you're left with all these like super fast decks that get under Exclude. Or, so for example, like the burn decks or like the Angler Terror decks. Exclude is a bit too slow. Or decks that just like don't really care about having their stuff counted. So yeah, the stock of Exclude has gone way down. I'm not very impressed with that as a card anymore. So that's gone. And the last card was the Compulsive Research, which is like a okay-ish fine card, but in the end I cut it, and you will understand why when I explain. So the first breakthrough I had was to increase the number of mystical teachings up to 3. So a lot of decks did this in the past, like even way back going to when like Prism and stuff was still legal. And in those builds of the deck, when you had like Prism and Bonder's Ornament and those the more effects in the deck that draw cards, having 3 teachings was less important because you were much more likely to find the first one. But now in this build of the deck where you don't have so many cantrips, you don't have as many ways to cycle through your deck, the velocity of the deck is a bit lower. And like conversely, or in the same sort of direction, you have the extra ramp from the orb, the Navigation Orb. Those two factors combined, the lower velocity plus the ramp, means that like the first mystical teachings is one of the best cards you can draw, and you're less likely to find that teachings if you only have 2 copies because you don't have the ornaments and the prism anymore. It's just one of the like best cards you can have access to. So rather than jumping through all these hoops of like, do I want Exclude as like the card advantage thing? Like, what is the what are we doing for ways to like draw through our deck to like find what we need? Actually, just increasing the number of teachings to 3 has been really successful, and I think that's it sounds like a really simple thing, but from the previous version of the deck, I think that's the most significant change, or the most important change. Just increasing the number of teachings up to 3 makes the deck play so much better. Then now with teachings at 3, I think it's pretty important to have some instant speed effect that is like a real card advantage option. So the best thing that I have found for this is 1 copy of Forbidden Alchemy. Like in the late game where you have Tron going, the flashback lets you plus cards off it. In the early game where you only have 3 mana, you can use it to find the next Tron land or whatever tool you need. When you play it early in the game, it can mill Moment's Peace or extra mystical teachings to help you keep the cards flowing. Yeah, Forbidden Alchemy is a pretty nice option. The only problem I would say with Forbidden Alchemy is it can be awkward versus Graveyard Hate sometimes. When you look at the top 4 and you see a card that you don't necessarily want to put in your hand at that moment, but you also don't want to put it in the graveyard to expose it to Graveyard Hate. But that's a pretty uncommon occurrence, I would say. So yeah, overall, I think Forbidden Alchemy is probably the best slot for this role. Like there are enough situations where just using teachings to find an extra impulse is a bit too low impact. Having the Forbidden Alchemy is just enough of an upgrade, and it's good enough in most game situations that I'm happy to play it. So Yeah, the only other competition for this slot, I think, is the card Mental Journey, which is like a 6 mana Ancestral Recall with basic land cycling. I think that card is also not bad. And there's like it's a little bit debatable about whether it's actually better than Forbidden Alchemy or not, because you have the basic land cycling mode as a way to make use out of it in the early game. And in the late game, you can argue whether drawing 3 cards is better or not than what Alchemy gives you. But I think you want to play one or other of those cards in the slot. That's the only 2 options I'm really considering. So we lost the Explore, the Compulsive Research, and the Exclude, and we added the Alchemy and the Teachings. So with the Compulsive Research gone, the deck would only have 1 win condition in the Dinrova Horror, which is not necessarily a huge issue, and the deck can avoid decking itself because you have the Memory Lapse in it still. So as long as you have Ephemerate or Ghostly Flicker Loop, you can never deck out in your draw step because you just keep Memory Lapsing your own spells. But it might be nice to have the 2 win conditions still, just to like increase the density of threats that you have. But the question is, like, which one might you want to play? And you probably figured out what this card is because I'm probably going to put it in the thumbnail of the video or something. But it's a new downshift to Pauper, one which has got basically no attention at all, really, I don't think, from Dominaria United, which is Meteorite. So what this card does, it's a 5 mana artifact, tap for any color of mana, so like Monolith or Darksteel Ingot or any of those, but it's 5 mana. And it has the ability, when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. So the first thing is that the extra Monolith is often welcome, right? As a Tron deck, you want to turn your excess colorless mana into colored mana. So that's quite fine already. Into the battlefield, 2 damage is sometimes decent on its own. You know, you can take out like a Delver of Secrets or something, or a Glinthawk, just as a little bit of a speed bump. But the really interesting thing about this card is that it's an artifact, which means Ghostly Flicker can target it, and it comes into play untapped. So if you have this board state, you can tap this for 2 mana, tap that for blue mana, Ghostly Flicker both of these, they come back, this deals 2 damage to the opponent and you use your wall to get your flicker back, then you do it again, right? 2 mana, blue, flicker these. So essentially what you're doing is every 1 mana you spend converts into 1 damage, which is the same rate as Rolling Thunder, right? Because X converts to X damage, Rolling Thunder or Fireball or whatever. Except you can arguably say you get like a slightly better rate because you don't have to spend the red, right? You're just directly getting the mana converting into damage. So, and the upside of this setup compared to a card like Rolling Thunder is that you can spend all the mana in your opponent's end step to fight over counterspells and things like that. And you don't have to spend all the mana in one shot. So it's a lot harder to interact with it with counterspells. The downside, of course, is that it's another flicker combo, which Rolling Thunder doesn't necessarily have to be. Like if your opponent's sitting on a stack of Tormod's Crypt or whatever, then this is another flicker combo that will get blocked by that. So So that's can be a problem. I mean, the graveyard hate is not at a... It's not overrepresented in the metagame right now, so I don't think it's a huge issue necessarily, but it's something to consider. But yeah, the combination of the fact that it's another mana rock and it can be kind of good in the mid game as well. Like even on like a mid game turn where you don't have enough mana to do this trick versus your opponent's face, you can just do it a few times on their creatures as well, right? Like 2 damage per thing. You can kill all of their modern ages, or like it kills Guardian of the Guild Pact as well because the Meteor is colorless. So yeah, pretty solid. And the fail case is that it's just a mana artifact, which the deck is fine to have as well anyway. So yeah, with all those things combined, I'm actually pretty happy with the Meteorite. I thought it would just be like a silly fun card, but the floor on it is like relatively high, and it lets the deck attack from a slightly different direction than all the other cards permit. So the one Meteorite I've been pretty happy with, but that's like the most flexible new addition to the list, I would say, like the least certain one. The more important thing is to play the 3rd Teachings. That's the biggest, most impactful change, and then that leads into playing instant speed, big dig effects, so like the Alchemy or the Mental Journey. And then you sort of have 1/60th card that you're not really sure about, but I think the Meteorite is performing pretty well. But it might turn out to be that kind of like explore effect where like after a few more games I realize it's not that good or something like that. But yeah, that's the main deck so far. In the sideboard, so the sideboard is a little bit unrefined still at the moment. So what I would say, for Pyroblast, for Hydroblast, so you can play slightly more or less of these because the blue and red Elemental Blast are legal in Pauper as well. So I'm not 100% sure that these numbers are perfectly correct, but it's probably something close to it, like the Pyro is good versus the blue decks, and you need hate versus like burn and kill fiend and stuff. So something around this number is probably correct, but it's a little bit flexible. One breath weapon I think is essential. It's not good against every deck, obviously, and the Fairies decks are on a bit of a decline right now because they don't play very well versus the Basilisk Gate stuff. But I think it's still worthwhile just to have the one copy of this. Like in the matchups where it's good, it's really strong, and you have so many teachings to find it, it just makes sense to play it. In the past, I only played one Fangren Marauder, but like the affinity matchup is tough enough that I think you want a second one. Like the matchup is just really hard if you don't find it. Like with that, all your cards are just overall too strong, and you don't really have anything that really dismantles their plan. Like you can fog them, but then they'll just outdraw you and burn you with munitions and galvanic blast, or like if you try to like board into more counter spells like Hydroblast or whatever to fight that plan, then you just end up dying to like Mere Enforcer or whatever. The only thing that like really like sits on top of their game plan, all of their different game plans, and makes it really hard for them to win at all is this card. And the matchup is hard enough that you really need to find it. So I think I would increase that. I would play a second one for sure. At the moment, I don't think you need 3. I mean, it's an option if you think the deck is really popular, but at the moment, I think I would stick with just 2. Remember, in this list, you have the treasure tokens from your Heap Gate, and you also have the Navigation Orb as well as another artifact that sacks itself, plus the Expedition map. So not only is it really good versus Affinity, because that deck has its own artifacts that it wants to sack. Now you can also board this in versus any deck that's trying to burn you out, which is quite nice as well, because you have all the artifacts in your own deck that will trigger it. 1 cast down. I still think you probably want this effect, just to have a way to interact with decks like walls. It's basically only walls, I think, because like you would board it in versus like Goblin combo, for example, as well, but you have a lot of other tools for that matchup because you have Hydroblast and Bojuka Bog, and then maybe you would board this in against some decks that have Gourmet Angler in them, but that's not super clear to me at the moment either. So yeah, it's like it's the best option at doing what it does. It's just not clear to me that you need a card that does that in the metagame right now. But yeah, there's enough threat of like needing to kill creatures that I'm happy to have one of that card. And then the other remaining sideboard slots, I'm still really not sure about. So the one Dispel is probably good, like the Ancient Grudge is sort of like how bad can it be kind of thing. Like you probably want a way to kill Relic and Prejudice and stuff, even though they're not that popular. And then the Negate is just like a bit of a catch-all versus combo, and it's also one of the only tools you can really use versus decks like Ponza. So yeah, in a previous build of the deck, I said I really liked Desert as a sideboard option to get with your Expedition map. I don't know if that's that necessary anymore because the Furies decks have really fallen off. Again, because they play quite badly into the Gates decks, which are really popular now. So yeah, so this is the 3 sideboard slots I'm not as sure about. So 2 Fangren Marauder, cast down, breath weapon, and the 8 blast I would almost certainly use, and then these 3 I don't know. So talk about the metagame positioning of the deck. The Gates decks are quite popular now, and Tron is really good at beating those. They need to tap out in their main phase to do anything threatening, because all the creatures have no power unless they activate Basilisk. And when they commit to that, you can just fog them. All their like weenie value creatures you don't even care about, like Sacred Cat and crap like that, like it doesn't interact with your deck at all. They have like no instant speed removal at all, so they can't interact with your flicker stuff. If they ever journey to nowhere, like your Mulldrifter or whatever, then you can just eventually find Dinrova Horror and bounce it and like get insane value, and then just get your flicker thing going and win. You have both Dinrova and Meteor to kill the Guardians. It's just a perfect matchup. If you want to make the matchup even easier, you can also put a capsize in your 75 somewhere. But I think that's just a bit overkill. Against most other matchups, it's too slow and doesn't really do anything. But if you want to beat Gates really badly, then that's a good option as well. And because that deck is really good, the Ninjutsu deck is a lot less popular now, which is one of the worst matchups for this in the past. So that's another thing that makes me like Tron in this metagame at the moment. And if people are trying to play like a tempo deck in Pauper right now, the most common version is the either mono blue Terra or like blue black Terra, with talking about the Tolarian Terra. So that's either as like a mono blue Delver style deck without fairies, or like the blue black tempo strategy. And it's way easier for Tron to beat those than decks that have Ninja of the Deep Powers, because they don't snowball really. Like they have to get a thing going with like milling their deep analysis or whatever. And it's much more effective to deal with the big vanilla fatties with fog effect as well. So that's another thing that makes me like the positioning of Tron at the moment. What I would need to test a bit is how the matchup goes versus the new red decks. I would imagine it's a little bit of a challenge, but those decks are also more artifact based than they have been in the past, because they're like Kuldotha burn rather than the like burn, so to speak. So your Fangren Marauder has extra text in that matchup as well, because if they sack their blood tokens or their Kuldotha, their synthesizer, you get game 5 life off it. I mean, you could argue that if you get to the point in the game where you're casting this, you might have already won anyway, but it's definitely not necessarily true at all. So yeah, I think people are sleeping on Tron and they just sort of haven't figured out the like orb tech, or they haven't got a list that like quite works since the Prism and the Ornament ban. But I think this list is actually really solid. If you can figure out those last few sideboard slots, and you're playing in a metagame where you don't expect people to be on like Ponza or combo, then I think this is actually a really good choice in the metagame right now. So I hope you like that video, like, subscribe, all that stuff. This has been Li-Fi TCG with Pauper Orbtron signing out.